Welcome to Coruzant Technologies, home of the Digital Executive Podcast. Welcome to the Digital Executive. Today's guest is Gini Graham Scott. Gini Graham Scott is a nationally known writer, consultant, speaker, and seminar leader specializing in business and work relationships, self-help, professional and personal development, social trends, science, and crime. She has published over 50 books with major publishers and 250 books through her company, Changemakers Publishing and Writing. Gini is also a game designer who published over 150 games with major game companies, including 120 games and books and audiobooks by ALB Games. Recent games are card, communication, and party games on relationships, success, mental health, world travel, scams, crime, and AI. Well, good afternoon, Gini. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely, my friend. I appreciate it. And I know you're hailing out of Danville, which is, I know, east of the Bay Area, but I'm just so glad that you're here. I'm in Kansas City. Making the 2-hour difference in time zones sometimes is a challenge. So thank you. And Gini, I'm going to jump into your first question. You've built an incredibly diverse career as a writer, game designer, filmmaker, and consultant. What experiences shaped your journey to becoming such a prolific creator and thought leader?
Well, I started thinking about it, and I think it goes back to when I was a kid, because I started, when I was 7 years old, I started writing children's books. And I went to an art class, and I remember my parents being told that I created more art than anybody in the class. I had more paper that I used. And I've always sort of used that kind of thing where whatever I'm doing triggers something, and I write different articles or I give books or whatever. I started writing books when I was in college. And I started writing proposals about ghostwriting or haunting houses. And it's like everything that I experienced led to something else. And then when anything went wrong, I started writing about it. Like I was writing some material for people and they lied to me about the money part of it. And so I ended up writing a bunch of books about lying. And then I was on Oprah about Liar Liar came out with Jim Carrey. And so I was on the television show. And then I also had an experience when I was ghostwriting, and I discovered that there was a scam going on. I didn't know about it. I was writing legitimate material of turning scripts into books. Books into scripts and films. And what they did is they created a phony executive, and then they were using all these to create these marketing materials. And then the marketing materials, which were legitimate materials that I wrote, didn't go anywhere because they went to this sort of phony executive. And when I discovered it, I ended up writing a book about that called The Big Con, where I discovered all these people I had worked with were cheated by this company. And I stopped working with them and I reported them to the FBI. And so then that became The Big Con, which I wrote about. And then that turned into films. And some of the films suggested the books, like I did some films on scams, and that suggested books on scams. One thing led to another. And so my whole life has been like that.
I really love that story. As a kid, you started out writing kids' books, and the fact that you created more art than anybody in the class is amazing. Just kind of shows that drive and that inspiration that you had. The curiosity drove that creativity, which is awesome. Of course, this took you through your whole entire adult life as well. This diverse writing experience led you to other experiences, introductions, opportunities, films. I think that's amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Gini, with over 300 books published across traditional and independent platforms, what drives your creative output and ability to consistently produce content at such scale?
Well, I think the idea of doing things, they don't have to be perfect, but to do them and they're good quality. And rather than trying for perfection in everything, which could really hold you back, almost good or almost perfect. I think in fact, that led to a song called Almost Perfect. Almost Perfect's good enough for me. I also write songs, and I have about 150 songs that I've done with recently a composer. I started writing songs about 30 years ago, and I went to Nashville a couple of times, and one thing led to another. And so I was always exploring and looking at things differently. And I went to school. I ended up getting 5 master's degrees after I got a PhD, and I have a JD degree. And so I've always loved education and learning about new things. And then one thing led to another, and inspires the book. My first published book was a thesis I had done as a sociology student. I got a PhD in sociology. And so I turned my dissertation into a book that was published by Greenwood Publishing. This was a long time ago. And so that led to one thing led to another. And then I was in a magical group and I wrote a book about magic. And I got kicked out of it because I started discovering it. And I realized that they were kind of doing evil things. And so anyway, one thing led to another. And I've always believed in the idea of turning things around. So if something bad happens to you, something goes wrong in your life, or if you see that happening in other people or in society, then I've written books about resolving the problems in your own life and society. So one thing leads to another.
That's amazing. Gosh, I'm totally inspired. The big nugget I took away about your success, though, is projects don't have to be perfect. They just have to have that quality. And in fact, it led to a song, and you were a songwriter as well, but almost perfect is good enough for me. And I think that's pretty cool. And at the end of the day, one thing leads to another. And I think that's, again, it's a chain of events and experiences that inspired you to move on to the next project, which is amazing. And kudos to you. Gosh, 5 masters, a JD, and a PhD. I'm so proud of you. Thank you. You make us look all insignificant here, but Gini, I appreciate that. And Gini, as a game designer with over 150 published games, how do you see interactive formats like games enhancing learning, communication, and personal growth?
Well, I think games will trigger discussions. I just actually started with games in my 20s, and I did that, and I had about 24 published games with different companies. And I went around the country to different game companies. And this was a time before women entrepreneurs was really accepted. So I pretended to be the secretary in the company, and I had created this persona, the CEO, David Franklin, and I said, well, I'm just his secretary. And so, people would accept that. And then, about a year after that, the women entrepreneur group got started. But anyway, that got me started. And then in the age of AI, about 2 years ago, I started doing some games. And what inspired the first game was we had a film that was inspired by this book, The Big Con, which I told you about scams. And so I did this first game called Scamalot, which was a conversation game where you talk about scams. And I used the basic structure. I went to a game group that they had a game party, and they used this way of somebody would draw a card and then people would answer questions and then the person would get the best card. So I used that kind of structure to create a whole series of games based on communication, people deciding who gave the best answer, giving them the card, they would get a point. And so I did a couple of dozen games that way. Then I did some real fake games where you would say whether something's real or fake. So one thing led to another, and I started doing games about all sorts of things. I have games about the environment. I have games about giving advice, about good relationships, and so on. You can see them at albgames.net. So we've ended up doing over 100 games where each game takes about 6 or 7 hours to do. And one of the ways that's helped is having AI. So like I ask AI, well, give me cards for this topic. And so AI generates a whole bunch of cards. And then I have a VA who will turn this list of cards into the cards, and I give them an example of how to do it. And so that's been able to do them really quickly. And so, I've done numbers games, I've done word games, and, one thing leads to another, and I just sort of think about things. And so that's kind of the way I work.
Thank you. Gosh, one thing leads to another. You've done so much, but just to highlight a few things here, obviously you talked about games contributing to deep discussions, and you talked a lot about that, a lot of human interactive communication type games that you designed and created. And you've created many different formats and different genres, et cetera. And I believe it's aobgames.net, and we'll highlight that later on the website as well. But just love it. And the fact that, and I know that back in the day, things weren't very equal in the business world, as you talked about. And you marketed your ideas and your games as being the secretary of the company, but you were really behind the scenes, and you were the actual founder and entrepreneur. And I just appreciate your boldness and your courage to do what you did back in those days.
Well, one of the things that I always think you can always find different ways of getting to an objective if you have the objective and the goals in mind. And I've written books about that. In fact, recently I wrote a book called Play Life as a Game, where you structure your life as a game with rules, with activities, with objectives, with whatever. And you sort of think about playing that game and working out the details of it. And you can use visualization, you can use meditation, hypnosis, all these kind of tools and techniques. And AI can also be, you can have these conversations now with AI. I use ChatGPT to come up with outlines. I use Perplexity to write some material. And then also Claude and Gemini and Grok. And there are several others that are, the major platforms today, but they really speed things up. And there's very controversial because you right now you can't get copyrights anything, but you can use it. And a lot of writers are upset about it, or artists, because they're losing jobs. But I feel like if you look at it as a tool that you can use, you don't have to use a job. You can use it. You can use this in different ways to facilitate whatever you're doing. And of course, you go back and you edit it and you refine it, you do other things with it. And then I'm taking a course now on AI entrepreneurs and the way you can model this to increase your speed, do press releases, do marketing materials. There are all kinds of ways in which you can use it. I mean, there's this course, and they have 24 sessions of it. Each one is about almost 2 hours long. But there's so many ways you can use AI now. And so I think, when there's any new technology, is go and embrace it. It's like when photography came out, people would say it's not an art form, and gradually it gets accepted. So with any new technology, there's usually resistance to it, but then gradually more and more people are involved, and then you find different ways to use it effectively.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just wanted to have you expand on that just a little bit more. You talked a lot about this already, but how do you see that future of creativity in publishing and storytelling with AI? You shared some examples, but what opportunities does it create for these creators around the world? If you could just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Well, I think if you have an idea for something and you can go further with it. For example, I was talking about using this turnabout model of turning bad things into good things. So I might put a question to AI, give me an outline of different topics of things that are bad that you could turn into good things. So I could write a book about it and design it into so many chapters. Or I might do a kid's book where I have an idea for a little girl goes out in the wilderness and meets some scary animals and how does she cope with it? And so I would put the idea for the children's book, or I would put the idea for the song in it and say, generate a book with 16 sections of 500, 600 words. And each they have 16 chapters or 16 pages, because that's sort of the standard for a kid's book. Or I would say, all right, give me a country song dealing with, like I have this idea for I feel stuck, like a person stuck in a traffic jam. And so I put that into ChatGPT or Perplexity, and so I'll give me a song with a verse, 3 verses, a chorus, bridge, outro. And so it generates it. And then usually the conversation, do you want this as more friendly, or do you want this as more casual or more country style or radio style? And so, I'll go back and forth, and I may get several different versions, and then I edit them, and then I give them to the person who does the music part of it. And then after that, I've created a video that I have a channel at Changemakers Music where you can see that. You can see the trailers for the films at Changemakers Production, or Changemakers Films, rather. And, so I'll do that. And then, I kind of refine it when I do that. And anybody can put some information into it. I would suggest paying for the $20 or so a month, because then they keep a library and they can refer back to what you previously done and generate that. So I have put on, and I also use illustrations. So I have right now, I'm working on one on stuck in traffic. So somebody's stuck in traffic. So I work with Night Cafe, which works with Nano Banana and Gemini, and it has various platforms. And so I'll say, okay, so here's the prompt. And so I have to be good at doing prompts and being really detailed about what you want. And then I'll say, well, I have this guy who's stuck in traffic. He's here in a sports car and he's very upset and he's raising his hands and yelling and screaming. And so I put it in different platforms, and I've ended up with about 20 different images. And then I'm going to put that once I have the music, I'm going to put that into a song. So anything like that is people can just be as creative as they want to be, and they can use AI to help them be even more creative and come up with more ideas. And then they build on those ideas. Does that all make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You are a creator, and we see a lot of creators these days that, you can look at your glass half full or half empty. A lot of creators are looking at half empty saying AI is taking my job. But if you really embrace it and learn it like you have, and you've done this for so many years, but embracing all these tools, I'm so proud of you, the way that you've embraced all these platforms to be even more creative.
And what you say about half full, well, why not see it as full? You start filling it up.
Absolutely. With AI now. Absolutely. I love it. I love it. Gini, it was such a pleasure having you on today, and I look forward to speaking with you real soon.
Okay. Well, good talking to you too.
Bye for now.